The observation deck was empty at this hour. And that was exactly why Commander Verkith came here every night. He stood by the massive viewport, his 9-foot frame blocking out the starlight behind him, and watched the ships come and go from Nexus Station like fireflies dancing in the cosmic dark. His obsidian scales gleamed under the dim emergency lights, and his forearms hung loose at his sides, each one thick as a human torso and strong enough to tear through steel plating. He was the most decorated warrior in the Galactic Coalition, a living legend who had fought in 17 major conflicts and saved countless lives. And he was completely alone. The other species on the station avoided him like he carried some terrible disease. And in a way he supposed he did. He carried the name Thrakari 50 years ago. Before Verkith was even born, his people had swept across the Keleth Nebula like a plague of locusts, destroying everything in their path and leaving behind worlds stripped of life and hope. His own father had led that invasion, and millions had died screaming under Thrakari claws. The war had ended, and the Thrakari had joined the coalition as peacekeepers, trying to make amends for crimes that could never truly be forgiven. But the galaxy had long memories and short patience for those who looked like monsters. Verkith had spent 30 years proving himself, earning every medal and commendation through blood and sacrifice. And it had changed nothing when he walked through the corridors of Nexus Station. People crossed to the other side when he entered the mess hall. Conversations died and eyes looked away. Even his own kind kept their distance from him, because Verkith had spoken openly against his father's legacy. And that made him a traitor to some and a reminder of shame to others. 3 years on this station, surrounded by thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds. And he had never once shared a meal with another person. The loneliness had become a familiar weight on his chest, heavy as armor and twice as cold. He heard the door open behind him and turned his massive head, expecting to see a maintenance worker or perhaps a lost tourist who would squeak in fear and run away. Instead, he saw a small human woman with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and grease stains on her uniform. She was holding a datapad and squinting at it with obvious frustration. "Oh," she said, looking up at him. Her eyes went wide as she took in his full height and the scars that crossed his face like the lines on an ancient map. Verkith waited for the fear to come, for the gasp and the retreat and the hurried apology that always preceded flight. But the woman just tilted her head to one side and studied him with open curiosity. "Sorry to bother you," she said. "I am completely lost, and this stupid datapad keeps sending me in circles. Do you know where Junction 7C is?" Verkith blinked his amber eyes slowly. In 30 years of service, no one had ever asked him for directions. "Junction 7C is 2 levels down," he rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together in the deep earth. "Take the central lift and turn left at the hydroponics bay. 2 levels down," the woman repeated, nodding. "Central lift, left at hydroponics. Got it." "Thank you so much." She did not leave. Verkith felt something strange stir in his chest as she continued to stand there, looking at him without fear or disgust. He did not know what to do with this small human who refused to act the way everyone else did. "I am Elena," she said, tucking the datapad under her arm and extending her hand toward him. "Elena Vasquez, new maintenance technician. Well, actually, I am a xenobiologist with 3 doctorates, but my research funding got cut, so now I fix broken pipes and clean air filters." She said all of this very quickly, as if the words had been waiting inside her and finally found a way out. Verkith looked at her small hand, so fragile compared to his own massive claws, and felt completely uncertain for the first time in decades. Slowly, carefully, he reached out with one of his lower hands and wrapped his fingers around hers. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "I am Commander Verkith," he said. "I know who you are," Elena replied. and there was something in her voice that made him tense. "I read about you when I first arrived on the station. You are the HFY war hero that everyone is afraid of." Here it comes, Verkith thought. Here comes the moment when she realizes what she is doing and pulls away. "You look really tired," Elena said instead. "Not physically tired, but the kind of tired that goes all the way down to your bones." "I know that look because I see it in my own mirror sometimes." Verkith had no words. This human woman had looked at him and seen not a monster, not a war criminal's son, not a weapon to be feared and avoided. She had seen loneliness. "I was going to grab some coffee before I got lost," Elena continued, seemingly unaware of the earthquake she had just caused in his ancient warrior heart. "There is a little place on Deck 7 that stays open late. Do HFY drink coffee? I have no idea what your species considers appropriate beverages." "I do not know," Verkith admitted. "I have never tried it." Elena's face lit up with a smile that seemed far too bright for this dim observation deck. "Well then," she said, "only one way to find out. Come on, my treat. You can tell me about those scars, and I will tell you about the time I accidentally released a swarm of Venusian moths in a coalition research facility." She turned and walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at him with raised eyebrows. "Are you coming?" Verkith stood frozen by the viewport, caught between 30 years of isolation and one small human woman who apparently had no survival instincts whatsoever. Something inside him, something old and wounded and desperately hopeful, made the decision for him. He followed her. The coffee turned out to be a bitter black liquid that humans apparently needed to function, and Verkith found it surprisingly acceptable. Elena talked enough for both of them, her hands moving constantly as she described her research and her dreams and her terrible sense of direction. And Verkith listened. He listened like a man dying of thirst who had finally found water, drinking in every word and every laugh and every casual gesture that treated him like a normal person instead of a monster. When the station's lights shifted to indicate the late hour, Elena stood and stretched. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. As if it were the most natural thing in the world, Verkith looked at this strange, fearless human and felt something crack open inside his chest. "Yes," he said. "Same time tomorrow." Elena smiled and walked away, leaving Verkith alone with his cold coffee and a warmth in his chest that he had not felt in 30 years. He did not know it yet, but his life had just changed forever, all because one human had the courage to offer him a cup of coffee. Word spread through Nexus Station, faster than a plasma fire in a fuel depot. The new human maintenance worker was spending time with the HFY. Monster people whispered in corridors and stared in the mess hall and sent messages to their friends on other decks about the crazy woman who apparently wanted to get herself killed. Elena heard the whispers, and she did not care even a little bit. Every evening after her shift ended, she would grab 2 cups of coffee from the little shop on Deck 7 and make her way to the observation deck, where Verkith waited. It had become their place now, their quiet corner of the universe where the stars burn cold and beautiful outside. The viewport and 2 unlikely friends learned how to understand each other. Verkith still found coffee to be, in his words, acceptably bitter, and Elena had learned that this was high praise from a HFY, had also learned to read the tiny movements of his face that other species could not see, the slight twitch of his mandibles that meant he was amused, the way his amber eyes softened when she made him laugh, the tension in his shoulders that slowly released as their conversations stretched longer into the night. He asked her questions. That was the thing that surprised her most about him. Not his size or his strength or the scars that told stories of battles she could barely imagine. It was the questions Vor wanted to know everything about Earth, about human history and culture, and the strange way her species formed connections with anything and everything around them. He asked about her research on symbiotic species and actually listened to her answers instead of nodding politely and waiting for her to stop. Talking, he asked why humans put cream in perfectly good coffee and seemed genuinely confused. When she could not give him a satisfying answer, no one had ever been this interested in her work before. And Elena found herself talking for hours about things she had never shared with anyone one evening about 3 weeks into their friendship. Verkith asked her the question she had been expecting since the beginning. "Your species," he rumbled, his voice low and thoughtful. "You form bonds so easily with others, even with those who are different from you. It is unusual among the peoples of the galaxy." Elena leaned against the viewport and considered her answer carefully. "Is it unusual?" she said. "I think most species want connection. They want friendship and understanding, and someone to share coffee with at the end of a long day. They are just afraid of reaching out because they might be rejected. The galaxy is right to fear me," Verkith said quietly. "I am the son of a war criminal. I carry the blood of millions on my name." "I know," Elena replied, and she saw him tense at her words. "Station security flagged me after our third meeting. They thought I should know that I was fraternizing with a dangerous individual. They showed me your file and told me about your father and the Caliph Nebula, and all the reasons I should stay away from you." Verkith's 4 hands clenched into fists at his sides. "And yet you return," he said. His voice barely above a whisper. Elena set down her coffee cup and turned to face him fully, looking up at his massive scarred face without a trace of fear. "You are not your father," she said firmly. "You have spent your entire life trying to make amends for crimes you did not commit. You have saved more lives than I can count. You have bled for people who hate you and fought for an alliance that treats you like a necessary evil." She reached out and placed her small hand on one of his massive arms. "That does not make you dangerous, Verkith. That makes you the most honorable person on this entire station." The giant warrior stood completely still, and Elena saw something glisten in his amber eyes for a long moment. Neither of them spoke. Then Verkith placed one of his hands gently over hers, his claws careful not to scratch her fragile human skin. "Thank you," he said. And those 2 words carried more weight than any speech Elena had ever heard. Their friendship deepened after that. Night Elena started bringing him research papers and discovered that Verkith had a gift for pattern recognition that put her best algorithms to shame. And soon they were working together on her xenobiology projects during their evening meetings. He began escorting her through the rougher sections of the station after her late shifts, though he always pretended it was simply his patrol route and not a deliberate effort to keep her safe. The other beings on the station noticed and wondered and worried. But nothing bad ever happened to Elena Vasquez one evening in the commercial district. A Vrelian merchant with too many tentacles and too few manners made crude comments about humans as Elena walked past his stall before she could respond. Verkith stepped out of the shadows behind her and simply stood there. 9 feet of scaled muscle and ancient warrior rage, saying absolutely nothing. The merchant closed his stall and relocated his business to another station the very next day. Elena laughed about it for a week, but the most important change was not in Elena or Verkith. It was in the other humans on the station. They had watched this small woman walk fearlessly beside a monster for months now, sharing coffee and conversation and genuine friendship. And nothing terrible had happened to her if Elena Vasquez was not afraid of the Thrakari. Perhaps there was nothing to be afraid of. A human engineer named Marcus nodded to Verkith in the corridor one morning. Just a small gesture of acknowledgement. But it was the first time anyone besides Elena had greeted him in years. A human child broke away from her parents in the mess hall and walked right up to Verkith to ask if she could touch his scales. And he had knelt down carefully and let her run her tiny fingers over his arm, while her parents watched with wide eyes. A human diplomat invited Verkith to a cultural exchange dinner and seemed genuinely interested in learning about Drakari traditions, small moments, small connections, small acts of courage, inspired by one woman who had decided that loneliness was a problem worth solving. Elena watched all of this with quiet satisfaction, but she never took credit for it. "I did not do anything special," she told Verkith one evening as they watched a group of human children playing with young Drakari cadets in the station park. "I just offered you coffee. You offered me more than coffee," Verkith replied, his voice soft. "You offered me a chance to be something other than a monster." Elena smiled up at him. "You were never a monster," she said. "The galaxy just needed someone to show them what I saw from the very beginning." Verkith looked down at his small human friend. This fragile, fearless woman who had changed his life with nothing more than kindness and persistence. "What did you see?" he asked. Elena's smile grew wider. "I saw a really tall guy who needed a friend," she said. "Now come on. I heard there is a new coffee blend from Earth, and I need you to tell me if it is acceptably bitter." Verkith laughed, a deep rumbling sound that made nearby beings look up in surprise. The giant alien warrior followed his tiny human friend through the corridors of Nexus Station. And for the first time in 30 years, he did not feel the weight of loneliness on his shoulders. He felt hope instead. The Festival of Seven Suns was the biggest celebration of the year on Nexus Station. Beings from 100 different worlds gathered in the central hub to share food and music and stories. And the corridors were filled with light and laughter and the wonderful chaos of cultures colliding in joy. Elena had been looking forward to it for weeks. She had bought a new dress and spent an hour trying to explain the concept of dancing to Verkith, who had listened with patient confusion and eventually agreed to attend the festival as her escort, but Verkith was not on the station when the celebration began. He had been assigned to a diplomatic escort mission 3 days earlier, a routine job that should have taken him no more than 48 hours. But complications had delayed his return. Elena told herself it was fine, that she would save him some of the special festival pastries and tell him all about it when he got back. She was standing in the central hub with 300 other beings when the first explosion rocked the station. The lights went out. Emergency sirens screamed through the darkness. And then the shooting started. The insurgents called themselves the Pure Light, and they believed that humanity had corrupted the Galactic Coalition with dangerous ideas about equality and friendship between species. They had planned this attack for months, waiting for the festival when security would be stretched thin and hundreds of targets would be gathered in one place. They took the medical bay first, then engineering, then the central hub where Elena and the other festival guests were trapped. The leader of the Pure Light was a tall, thin being with silver skin and eyes full of hate, and he stood on the main stage with a plasma rifle in his hands and announced that executions would begin in 1 hour unless the coalition met his demands. Elena looked around at the terrified faces of her fellow hostages, humans and aliens alike, all of them frozen with fear. She thought about Verkith and wondered if she would ever see him again. Then she took a deep breath and started walking among the hostages, talking to them in a calm, steady voice, guiding them through breathing exercises and quiet words of comfort. If she was going to die here, she was going to die being useful far away from the station. Verkith's ship was racing through the void at maximum speed. He had heard the distress call on the emergency channel, and his heart had nearly stopped when he recognized Elena's voice among the background noise of the hostage situation. She was alive, she was in danger, and he was still hours away. All coalition forces are ordered to hold position, the Admiral's voice crackled through the ship's communication system. Negotiations are underway with the Pure Light insurgents. The Pure Light does not negotiate, Verkith growled. his claws digging into the armrests of his command chair. They will execute hostages to make their point. I have studied their methods. They believe death is a message. Stand down. Commander, the Admiral said firmly, that is a direct order. We cannot risk escalating the situation. Verkith felt rage building in his chest like a star. Going supernova, he thought about Elena, small and fragile and brave, standing in that central hub with a gun pointed at her head. He thought about all the evenings they had shared, all the coffee and conversations and quiet, moments of connection that had saved him from drowning in loneliness. He thought about the first time she had smiled at him without fear. Commander, his pilot said nervously, a young Mechari with trembling hands. What are your orders? Verkith made his decision. Take us in, he said. Full speed. Prepare for emergency docking. But sir, the Admiral said to hold position. I heard what the Admiral said, Verkith replied. And his voice was cold and terrible and absolutely certain. Now take us in. The pilot looked at the giant Thrakari warrior and saw something in those amber eyes that made argument impossible. He engaged the engines. Verkith spent the remaining hours of the journey studying the station schematics, memorizing every corridor and ventilation shaft and maintenance access point the insurgents would expect, and assault from the main airlocks where security forces would have to fight through narrow choke points. They would not expect a single warrior coming through the walls when his ship docked at an abandoned cargo bay on the station's outer ring. Verkith did not wait for backup or permission or anything else. He simply started moving. He tore through maintenance corridors like a force of nature, his forearms ripping open sealed hatches and his massive body crashing through obstacles that would have stopped any other being. He moved in absolute silence despite his size. Decades of combat experience guiding his feet along paths that made no sound. The first insurgent never saw him coming. Verkith grabbed the guard from behind and squeezed until unconsciousness came, then lowered the body gently to the ground and kept moving. He could have killed them. Every instinct in his warrior body screamed at him to unleash the violence that his species was famous for, to paint the walls with the blood of those who threatened Elena and the other hostages. But Elena had called him honorable. She had said he was not a monster, and so Verkith fought like he had never fought before, disabling instead of destroying, breaking bones instead of ending lives, leaving a trail of unconscious enemies behind him as he carved a path toward the central hub. The battle lasted 11 minutes when it was over. Verkith stood in the middle of the central hub, surrounded by groaning insurgents and staring hostages and the broken remains of the Purolite's careful plans. He had been shot 7 times, and thick blue blood dripped from wounds on his arms and chest and face, but he was still standing. Elena pushed through the crowd of hostages and ran toward him, tears streaming down her face. You came, she whispered, her voice breaking on the words. Verkith looked down at his small human friend, this woman who had given him hope when he had none, and felt his legs begin to shake. I will always come, he said. Then the blood loss caught up with him, and the greatest warrior in the Galactic Coalition collapsed at the feet of a human. Maintenance technician Elena screamed for help. Coalition forces burst through the doors moments later, too late to fight and just in time to see a small human woman cradling the head of a giant alien warrior in her lap. She was telling him to stay with her, to hold on, to not leave her alone and even unconscious. Verkith's hand was wrapped gently around hers. Verkith woke in the medical bay 3 days after the attack. The first thing he saw was a white ceiling and bright lights. That hurt his eyes. The second thing he saw was Elena Vasquez asleep in a chair beside his bed. Her hand still holding one of his, she looked terrible, with dark circles under her eyes and tangled hair and the same clothes she had worn during the festival. But Verkith thought she was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. He tried to move and immediately regretted it as pain exploded through his body from 7 different wounds. Elena jerked awake at his groan, and when she saw his eyes open, she burst into tears. "You stupid, brave idiot," she sobbed, squeezing his hand hard enough to hurt. "You almost died. You almost left me alone. I was so scared. I am sorry," Verkith rasped, his throat dry and his voice weak. "I did not mean to frighten you. You saved 300 lives," Elena said, wiping her eyes with her free hand. "You saved my life. And you did it without killing anyone. The doctors said they have never seen anything like it. 7 gunshot wounds and you still managed to take down 20 insurgents without ending a single life." Verkith closed his eyes. "You said I was not a monster," he whispered. "I wanted to prove you right." Elena leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his massive, scarred hand. "You did," she said. "You absolutely did. But not everyone saw it that way the next morning." 2 coalition military police officers arrived at the medical bay with a formal document, stripping Verkith of his rank and commendations. Pending tribunal, the charges were serious disobeying a direct order from a superior officer unauthorized, breach of an active hostage situation conduct, unbecoming a coalition. Commander Verkith accepted the document without emotion because he had known this was coming. From the moment he told his pilot to ignore the Admiral's orders, he did not regret his choice. "This is insane," Elena raged, pacing back and forth in his hospital room like a caged animal. "You saved everyone. You stopped a massacre. And they want to punish you for it?" "I broke the chain of command," Verkith said calmly. "In a military organization, that is a serious offense." "But you were right," Elena insisted. "The Pure Light was going to start killing hostages. You said so yourself. You knew negotiations would fail." "Being right does not excuse disobedience," Verkith replied. "The Admiral gave an order. I ignored it. There must be consequences, or the entire structure of military discipline falls apart." Elena stopped pacing and stared at him with frustration burning in her eyes. "How can you be so calm about this?" Verkith managed a weak smile. "Because I would make the same choice again," he said. 1,000 times over, I would make the same choice. Word of the tribunal spread across the station and beyond. Within hours, crowds began gathering outside the medical bay. Humans mostly, but also members of other species who had been saved. During the attack, they held signs demanding justice. For their hero, they chanted his name Human. Journalists broadcast the story across 12 systems, telling the tale of a lonely giant warrior and a human woman who had befriended him and the impossible rescue that had saved 300 lives. Human diplomats made pointed inquiries about the coalition's treatment of its heroes. Human citizens sent millions of messages to coalition representatives, demanding clemency. "You have become a symbol," Elena told Verkith, sitting beside his bed as they watched the crowds growing on a news broadcast. "The human who believed in you and the warrior who proved her right. People are inspired by our story." "I am a symbol of disobedience," Verkith said. "You are a symbol of loyalty and friendship and doing the right thing when the rules fail," Elena replied firmly. "Humans do not forget that kind of thing. We remember our heroes. We fight for them." The tribunal convened 2 weeks later in the largest council chamber on Nexus Station. Representatives from 30 different species packed the room, along with journalists and diplomats and curious citizens who had traveled from distant systems just to witness this moment in history. The Admiral presented his case with cold precision. Military discipline was the foundation of the coalition, he argued, and orders existed for good reasons. If every soldier decided to act on personal feelings instead of following commands, then the entire alliance would collapse into chaos, he recommended dishonorable discharge and imprisonment. Then, Elena Vasquez took the stand. She was small and ordinary-looking, standing before that vast assembly of powerful beings. But there was steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. "I want to tell you about loneliness," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I want to tell you about a giant warrior who had been abandoned by his own people and punished for his father's sins, who served an alliance that treated him like a necessary evil and a reminder of past crimes." The council chamber was absolutely silent. For 30 years, Commander Verkith gave everything he had to the Coalition, Elena continued. "He bled for you, he fought for you, he saved countless lives. And in return, you gave him nothing but isolation and fear." She looked around at the assembled representatives, meeting their eyes one by one. "Then I met him, and I offered him coffee. And I discovered something that everyone else was too afraid to see. I discovered that underneath all those scales and scars and terrible warrior strength, there was a person who just wanted to belong." Elena's voice grew stronger. "Commander, Verkith did not break orders to prove a point or seek glory. He broke them because he has learned something that this coalition has forgotten. He has learned that the bonds we form with each other matter more than the regulations we write." She turned to face Verkith, who sat in a special reinforced chair at the defendant's table, his wounds still bandaged and his amber eyes fixed on her face. "He did not save those hostages because it was his duty," Elena said. "He saved them because he cared, because somewhere in his ancient warrior heart, he found room for friendship and loyalty and love." She looked back at the tribunal. "That is not a flaw to be punished," she declared, her voice ringing through the chamber. "That is an example to be followed." The chamber erupted in chaos. Humans and aliens alike were on their feet, shouting and applauding and demanding justice. The tribunal members tried to restore order, but the noise only grew louder in the middle of it all. Verkith sat perfectly still with tears running down his scarred face. No one had ever defended him like that before. No one had ever believed in him the way Elena believed. The tribunal deliberated for 6 hours behind closed doors. When they finally emerged, the lead judge announced their verdict with obvious reluctance. Commander Verkith would retain his rank but be reassigned to a new division, one that would be created specifically for him. It was called the Human Thrakari Cultural Exchange Initiative. The crowd cheered. But Verkith knew the truth. It was meant to be a quiet exile, a way to remove him from real command without creating a martyr. He did not care. He was alive. He was free, and Elena was beside him. That was enough. 5 years had passed since the tribunal, and Nexus Station was a different place. The Human Thrakari Cultural Exchange Initiative had been created as a punishment, a way to quietly remove Verkith from any position of real importance. But something unexpected had happened. It had worked, not as a punishment, but as a bridge. Verkith and Elena had taken their exile and transformed it into something extraordinary, building connections between humans and Thrakari that no one had ever thought possible. Human researchers now studied Thrakari philosophy and found wisdom in traditions that had been dismissed as barbaric. Thrakari warriors learned human concepts of redemption and second chances, and discovered that their history did not have to define their future. The children who had grown up watching Elena and Verkith walk the corridors together now saw nothing strange about friendship between species. They had learned that giants could be gentle, and that small humans could have the biggest hearts. Within a year of its founding, the initiative had expanded to include 7 different species. Within 3 years, it had fundamentally changed how the Coalition approached relations between worlds that had once been enemies. Within 5 years, the galaxy itself had begun to shift. Verkith stood once again in the observation deck where everything had begun, watching ships from a dozen different worlds dock at the station. that had once shunned him. He was older now, his scales flecked with gray and his movements a little slower than they used to be. But his eyes still held the same quiet strength they always had. Elena stood beside him as she always did. Older too, with silver threading through her dark hair. Still bringing him coffee every evening. After all these years, she held 2 cups now. One filled with black coffee for him, and one with some new blend from a human colony world for herself. "Do you remember what you asked me?" she said, her voice soft in the dim light. "That first night when we met. You asked me why humans form bonds so easily." "I remember," Verkith replied, taking his cup from her hands with the same care he had shown since the very beginning. "I have thought about that question many times over the years," Elena said, leaning against the viewport and looking out at the stars. "And I think I finally have a good answer." "Tell me," Verkith said. Elena smiled. The same smile she had given him 1,000 times before. "Humans are fragile," she said. "We do not live as long as most species in the galaxy. We are not as strong or as durable or as naturally gifted for survival. A Thrakari warrior can live for 200 years, but a human is lucky to see 100. She took a sip of her coffee. "So we reach out," she continued. "We make connections wherever we can. We build bridges and form friendships and create families out of strangers. Because we know deep in our bones that we cannot survive alone. And when others refuse your offered hand," Verkith asked, "we offer it again," Elena said simply. "And again, until they understand that we mean it. Until they see that our friendship is not a trick or a trap, but a genuine gift." She reached out and placed her hand on his massive arm. The same gesture she had made 1,000 times before. "One human reached out to you, Verkith," she said. "Just one. With nothing more than a cup of coffee and a willingness to see you as a person instead of a monster." She gestured toward the viewport, where the ships of a dozen species moved in peaceful patterns. And look what happened. Verkith looked at the station he had once walked alone, now filled with friendships that crossed every boundary of species and history and fear. He looked at the memorial to the Festival of Seven Suns attack, where names of humans and Thrakarian beings from 100 other worlds were inscribed side by side. He looked at the young Thrakari cadets walking with human friends, laughing and talking as if there had never been a time when their peoples were afraid of each other. He looked at Elena, this small human woman who had changed his life with nothing more than kindness and courage. One human had the courage. He agreed quietly. "And she changed everything." Elena shook her head. "We changed everything together," she said. "I just brought the coffee. You brought the rest." Verkith laughed. That deep rumbling sound that had once frightened everyone who heard it and now drew smiles from beings who recognized it as the sound of a friend enjoying a joke. "I have learned many things from humans over these years," he said. "Your music and your stories and your strange obsession with putting cream in perfectly acceptable coffee." Elena grinned at the familiar complaint. "But the most important thing I learned," Verkith continued, "is that courage is not about being unafraid. Courage is about reaching out when every instinct tells you to protect yourself. It is about offering friendship when you have no guarantee it will be accepted." He placed his hand over hers. "You taught me that, Elena Vasquez, and I will carry that lesson for the rest of my life." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. The same tears she had cried so many times over the years. Tears of joy and connection, and the overwhelming feeling of being truly seen. "So what happens now?" she asked. Verkith looked out at the stars. "Now we keep building bridges," he said. "There are other giants out there, standing alone in other observation decks, waiting for someone to reach out to them." He turned to face her, his amber eyes warm with affection. "Thanks to you. They will not have to wait much longer." Elena leaned against his arm, feeling the steady beat of his 2 hearts through his scales. "Thanks to us," she corrected. They stood together in the starlight, the giant alien warrior and his small human friend. Watching the galaxy they had helped to change somewhere out there, on stations and ships and worlds they would never see. Other unlikely friendships were beginning. Other hands were reaching out across the void. Other bridges were being built, and it had all started with one human who had the courage to offer a cup of coffee to a lonely giant. The stars burned eternal in the viewport, and Elena Vasquez smiled. She had come to Nexus Station as a failed researcher with a broken career and no future. She had found something far more valuable than any scientific discovery. She had found a friend, and together they had shown the galaxy what humanity could do when it reached out with open hands and open hearts. Not through strength or technology or military power. Through kindness, through courage, through the simple stubborn refusal to let anyone stand alone in the dark. That was the human way, and the galaxy was better for it.